I'll defend him. Every head in the courtroom snapped toward the sound. The voice was sharp, steady, and completely unexpected. At the back of the room stood a young black woman, her apron still tied around her waist, sweat glistening on her forehead. She clutched a battered folder to her chest as if it were armor. A ripple of laughter broke out. Some people scoffed, a few pulled out their phones to record. "Who's she?" someone whispered. "Probably the cleaning lady." "What's next?" the janitor taking the bench. The gallery chuckled, but Alexis Carter didn't flinch. At 25, she was no stranger to condescension, but in this grand courtroom, built for power and prestige, the sting cut deeper than ever. The judge blinked, clearly startled. "Excuse me, miss." "Alexis Carter, Your Honor," she said firmly. "I wish to act as temporary counsel for Mr. Brandon Hayes." That name alone stirred another round of whispers. Brandon Hayes, tech billionaire, charming but calculating, now under federal investigation for fraud and misconduct totaling over $30 million. His defense lawyer, who had been paid a fortune, had vanished overnight. Rumor had it he'd fled the country. Brandon sat next to the empty defense chair, glaring at Alexis with disbelief. "You!" he barked. "You should be at home scrubbing floors, not playing lawyer in my case." Laughter roared through the gallery again. Someone muttered, "Bold of her to show up with a mop and big dreams." But Alexis held her ground. She drew in a steady breath and stepped forward. "I've studied every page of this case," she declared. "Every contract, every financial record, every testimony. I know this case better than anyone in this room." The judge leaned forward. "Miss Carter, are you a licensed attorney?" "No, sir. I attended Columbia Law, but had to leave after my second year because of financial hardship. Since then, I've worked in private homes to pay off my family's debts. But I never stopped studying. I've followed federal cases, memorized rulings, and spent 3 years poring over financial litigation. This case in particular, I know it backward." The room hushed. Even Victoria Sloan, the sleek prosecutor in her tailored navy suit, tilted her head with curiosity. "Objection," she snapped. "This is highly irregular, and frankly insulting to the justice system." The judge raised a hand. "Noted. But since Mr. Hayes's counsel has failed to appear, if he consents to let Miss Carter speak for this preliminary session, I will allow it, under strict supervision." Brandon's jaw tightened like he'd swallowed glass. "You expect me to let a maid represent me in federal court?" he muttered. Alexis leaned close, her voice low but firm. "I may not have a license, Mr. Hayes, but I'm the only one here not trying to bury you. Right now you have no one else." Brandon glared, chest heaving. Then, with a bitter grunt, he waved a hand. "Fine. Do your worst." Alexis nodded and strode to the defense table. She laid her worn folder on the desk and opened it with care. Inside were handwritten notes, cross-referenced case citations, color-coded tabs, and copies of contracts, the same ones Victoria Sloan was planning to dismantle. Victoria smirked. "Let me guess. Highlighters and grocery lists?" Alexis met her gaze. "No. Logic and receipts." Gasps echoed. The judge cleared his throat. "Proceed, Miss Carter." Alexis lifted a page. "On March 12th of last year, Mr. Hayes's company was asked to revise its joint venture with Altair Holdings. The revision, which the prosecution claims my client forged, was signed electronically from an IP address in Zurich. Yet the original terms," she held up a highlighted section, "were still valid under an SEC filing 2 weeks earlier. Meaning if anyone committed forgery, it was the plaintiff." Victoria's smile slipped. Alexis pressed on, voice clear and strong. The gallery, which had mocked her minutes before, now leaned in. Every word rang with conviction. For a year, Alexis had studied in secret, reading rulings during midnight shifts, listening to legal podcasts until her ears ached, even mailing herself documents to build her own archive. And now, here was her chance. The judge tapped his pen. "This is compelling. Court is recessed until tomorrow." Miss Carter, you may return for review. Alexis bowed her head slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. Her heart pounded as she stepped back. Eyes followed her, skeptical, shaken, but not dismissive. Brandon Hayes sat silent, lips pressed thin. But for the first time that day, he didn't look completely alone. That night, Alexis sat at her small kitchen table in Newark, where she once helped her younger brother with homework while stirring soup on the stove. Now the table was buried under sticky notes, legal documents, a half-eaten grilled cheese, and her open laptop replaying an old trial lecture. Her apron still hung over the chair, stained from her morning shift at the Hayes estate. The echoes of the courtroom wouldn't leave her mind, faces mocking, faces stunned, and Brandon Hayes's unreadable stare. She sipped cold coffee, leaning closer to the contract again. Something about the wording of the revised clause felt off. It didn't match Brandon's older agreements. It read like foreign legal jargon. She scribbled a note, compare phrasing, Altair versus old partners. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You were something else today, a low, amused voice said. Didn't expect the girl in the apron to flip the room upside down. Alexis froze. Who is this? Let's just say someone in that courtroom has more at stake than you realize. Careful where you poke, Alexis. You're stirring up a bear. The line went dead. Her hand trembled. She forced herself to breathe. Fear wasn't new, she'd grown up with it. Walking through dark alleys after school, watching her mother juggle 3 jobs and still face eviction notices. But this fear felt different. It was cold. Calculated. The next morning, she arrived at Brandon's estate early. He looked up, surprised. I didn't ask for a meeting, he said flatly. And you didn't ask for someone to save you in federal court, Alexis replied evenly. He studied her. You think yesterday changed anything? I think it cracked the door. Now we need to push it open. Brandon tapped a pen against his desk. You came prepared. I always am. You just never noticed. She stepped closer. Mr. Hayes, someone is framing you. That contract was too polished, too foreign. And you signed it remotely, right? I was in Napa that week. Wine conference. I signed documents on the go. Standard practice. Do you remember opening that exact file? He hesitated. Not really. My assistant Ryan usually prepped them. I just glanced and clicked. Alexis frowned. And where's Ryan now? He quit last month. Said he needed a break. Or maybe he just needed to get away. You think Ryan forged your signature? Brandon asked. I think someone used your trust to slip in that fake draft. And all the evidence points back to Ryan. That afternoon, Alexis took the subway to Midtown. She found the co-working space where Ryan Keller had once rented an office. The door to his room was ajar. Inside, papers were scattered, drawers open, laptop missing. The air smelled of burnt coffee and panic. Something had scared him off. On the floor, a folder lay half-hidden. Inside were 3 copies of the contract, 2 with different metadata. One marked Zurich. The other New Jersey. Alexis clutched it tight, her pulse racing. The next morning in court, she sat at the defense table, notes stacked neatly. Brandon didn't say much, but he gave her a slight nod when she arrived. Victoria Sloane swept in, heels clicking like gunfire. Morning, counselor, she said sweetly, eyes sharp. Ready for round 2? More than you know, Alexis replied. They clashed over the contract's origins. Alexis presented the metadata differences. Victoria objected, but the judge allowed it. Then Alexis held up her comparison of the clauses. Your Honor, the language in this revision reflects European legal dialect, not American. My client's past contracts followed U.S. standards. This ghost draft almost certainly came from overseas. The courtroom went silent. Brandon leaned forward, stunned. Victoria's jaw clenched. I request a delay, she said quickly. No need, Alexis countered, producing a report from a digital forensics team. This came from Ryan Keller's hard drive. And he hasn't been seen since yesterday morning. The judge's eyes narrowed. This may extend beyond fraud. We could be looking at evidence tampering and conspiracy. Court recessed. Alexis stepped into the cold wind outside, finally able to breathe. Brandon joined her at the railing. I don't know what to say, he muttered. Then don't, she answered, eyes still fixed on the skyline. Just don't underestimate the woman in the apron again. That evening, Alexis returned to the Hayes estate, exhausted. Her mind replayed every moment of the day, Victoria's shaken expression, the hushed murmurs, Brandon's stunned silence. For the first time, she felt like her voice had finally been heard. She kicked off her shoes in the quiet kitchen and let herself exhale. The staff had all gone home. The only sounds in the big estate kitchen were the low hum of the refrigerator and the steady tick of the wall clock. Alexis filled a mug with hot water, dropped in a chamomile tea bag, and leaned against the counter with her eyes closed. This kitchen was where it had all begun. 3 years ago, on her very first day as a housekeeper, she had stood in this very spot, just 22, broke, with dreams on hold. She used to hide her law textbooks under the sink. At night, when the house was quiet, she'd pull them out, reading briefs by flashlight, searching legal databases on a hand-me-down laptop. This kitchen had become her secret classroom. She took a sip, then froze. Something crinkled under her foot. Bending down, she found a torn envelope. No name, just the embossed logo of Altair Holdings. Her pulse spiked. Alexis carried it down to her basement quarters and carefully opened it. Inside was a wrinkled internal memo, dated 6 months before the lawsuit. It spoke of strategic realignment with Brandon Hayes' company, and hinted at ways to legally force renegotiation if Brandon resisted. A chill ran through her. This wasn't simple fraud. This was a setup, planned long before the first contract revision. She slipped the memo into a plastic sleeve and added it to her growing binder. Then she opened her notebook and scribbled names, Altair board members, lawyers, associates. She underlined one, Martin Lyle, general counsel at Altair and a former private equity partner. His name had popped up more than once in the documents she'd reviewed. The next morning, Alexis called an old Columbia classmate, Reggie Holmes, now an investigative reporter at a scrappy Queens paper. Reggie, I need a favor. Quiet. Fast. And completely off the record. He hesitated. You asking for a background check? I'm asking for a map of a fire before it burns everything down, she said. I think someone's been engineering this for months. That night, they met at a diner. Over stale coffee and greasy fries, Reggie slid her a folder. Lyle's tied to an offshore firm that makes a living drafting fake legal pressure points, designed to force contract renegotiations. He's been linked to at least 2 whistleblower cases. Both sealed. Alexis frowned. And? One whistleblower turned up dead 6 months after the settlement. Accident, they said. No autopsy. She closed her eyes, heart sinking. You sure you want to keep pushing this? Reggie asked quietly. I don't have the luxury of stopping, she replied. Not when people's lives are at stake. The next morning in court, Alexis kept her face composed as Victoria Sloane strode in with a smug smile and a new binder. Your Honor, Victoria began smoothly. We move to dismiss yesterday's metadata evidence. Its chain of custody is questionable. Alexis stood. Objection. The forensic review was authenticated and confirmed. And we have further documentation tying the altered contracts directly to an employee of the plaintiff. Victoria bristled. Miss Carter is not even a licensed attorney. The judge cut in. Objection overruled. The gallery buzzed with whispers. Brandon Hayes turned toward Alexis. He didn't speak, but his faint nod said everything. After the session, Alexis returned to the estate to gather more files. Passing through the hall lined with Hayes family portraits, she climbed the stairs to the office Ryan Keller had used before resigning. The room smelled of dust and leather. She rifled through drawers, staplers, notepads, chargers. Then, at the back of the lowest drawer, Her hand closed on something heavier, a black leather planner. Inside were mundane reminders and grocery lists. But tucked between April's pages was a sticky note scrawled in red ink, Zurich packet, 2913. Her heart thudded. That was the week Brandon's contract had been signed remotely from Zurich. Was this a deposit box? A courier file? She didn't know, but it was a lead. She was still staring when Brandon appeared behind her. I should have paid more attention, he said quietly. You trusted the wrong people, Alexis replied without turning. He stepped beside her, eyes on the planner. And you? What is it you want? She met his gaze at last. Justice. Even if no one writes about it. Brandon studied her for a long moment. You're wasting your brilliance scrubbing floors. No, she said firmly, sliding the planner into her binder. I've been preparing. Tomorrow, we dig deeper. 2 hours after sunrise, Alexis stood across the street from a gray building in Jersey City, coat pulled tight against the spring wind. She had cross-referenced a 4-digit code with courier lockers. The trail led her here. Inside, the receptionist barely looked up. Locker access? Alexis slid the sticky note across. 2913. Collecting on behalf of a former employee. ID? The woman asked flatly. Alexis handed over her old state ID. The receptionist squinted at the photo, then finally nodded. Yeah, it's still active. Someone dropped the packet off 8 weeks ago. Never came back for it. She handed over a key. Alexis found the locker, heart hammering. The lock clicked open. Inside sat a slim manila envelope sealed with red wax, stamped with the letter L, Lyle. Back in her apartment, she slid it open. Inside was a USB drive and a stamped memo marked confidential, internal counsel only. Her stomach flipped as she read. It was from Martin Lyle to Altair's board, outlining strategies for a hostile contract takeover, sample edits, instructions for remote signature trails via VPN, even a line. If resistance occurs, push legal action under pretext of misrepresentation. Her hands shook. The USB contained spreadsheets labeled with Brandon's projects. One file titled Forecast Projections, Altair Negotiation, Round 3 listed, Litigation Leverage, $23. 4 million. They had budgeted for the lawsuit. This wasn't fraud anymore. It was systemic abuse of power, weaponized law. That night, Alexis took the evidence to Reggie at the diner. He studied the files grimly. Whoever wrote this has the moral compass of a snake. Can you trace the IP logs? She asked. He nodded. Give me 2 days. As they spoke, Alexis noticed an older man in a booth across the diner, eyes fixed on her. She stiffened. Friend of yours? Reggie asked. No, she whispered. But I saw him at the courthouse 2 days ago. That night, back home, she reinforced her deadbolt. She copied the files onto 2 encrypted drives, one hidden inside a hollowed-out book, the other wrapped in foil and buried in her freezer behind a bag of peas. Then she built a timeline of every event, signature, and meeting. By 2 a.m., her kitchen table looked like the nerve center of someone else's conspiracy, only it was all too real. The next day in court, Alexis entered steady and unshaken. The judge called for pre-trial disclosures. Victoria rose. Your Honor, we request dismissal of speculative defense claims, especially from someone without a license. Alexis stood tall. I submit a confidential memo authored by Martin Lyle, Altair's general counsel, detailing premeditated tactics including forged documents and hostile acquisition strategies. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. This is absurd, Victoria snapped. Alexis handed the memo to the bailiff. It's time-stamped, metadata intact, and was discovered in a secure locker rented by Ryan Keller, Mr. Hayes's former assistant. The judge read carefully. Finally, he looked up. If this is authentic, it changes everything. Brandon turned to Alexis, eyes wide, not just in surprise, but with respect. Outside the courthouse, Alexis kept her face calm even as her pulse raced. The whispers inside still echoed in her ears. For once, the room hadn't laughed. They had gone quiet. Brandon joined her at the steps, his tie loose, his expression sharp and calculating. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of truth. You just tore the mask off a multi-billion-dollar operation. I didn't do it for you, Alexis said, keeping her eyes away from him. I did it because they thought no one would ever stand up to them. Brandon's expression didn't change, but something in his posture eased. You just saved my name from being destroyed, he admitted. You deserve more than my thanks. She turned toward him, her voice steady. What I want is access to everything. No more surprises. Every file tied to Altair, emails, memos, contracts. Full transparency. He hesitated, then nodded. You'll have it by morning. That night, Alexis returned home to find a plain white envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet with block letters. You've made enemies. Be careful what hill you choose to die on. No signature. She stared at it for a long time, then lit a match and set the note aflame in her sink. Sleep never came. Instead, she printed duplicate copies of every file, encrypted flash drives, and handed one off to Reggie in Queens before sunrise. By morning, a thick manila envelope sat on her porch. Brandon had kept his word. Inside were internal communications, Ryan Keller's emails, board minutes, exchanges with Altair execs. Patterns leapt out immediately. One thread stopped her cold, a string of late-night emails between Ryan and Martin Lyle, dressed up as consultations. But the timestamps matched nights Brandon had been traveling, too busy to notice what was being slipped through. Subject lines read Altair pressure plan, initial edits forwarded, and most damning of all, need this signed before Hayes returns. They had counted on Brandon being distracted, arrogant, inattentive. And when the plan unraveled, they dropped him, certain he wouldn't survive the scandal. Ryan vanished right on cue. Alexis knew her next move. That afternoon she tracked down Ryan's old East Village apartment. It was empty now, listed for sublet, but she convinced the landlord to let her check for a forgotten item, pretending to be Ryan's assistant. The place was stripped bare except for a pile of discarded folders on the counter. She rifled through them quickly, and froze. A printed receipt. Wire transfer. Swiss bank. Dated 1 week before the lawsuit was filed. Recipient, L Investments Zurich. Her chest tightened. She snapped a photo, folded the original, and slipped it into her pocket. Outside, a sleek black car eased up to the curb. The back window slid down, revealing a man in a tailored suit, early 40s, with pale blue eyes that didn't blink. Miss Carter. She instinctively stepped back. Who's asking? A representative, he said coolly. Our firm thinks this has gone far enough. You're smart. You know how these things end. You threatening me? Not at all. I'm giving you options. Stop now, and no one gets hurt. Walk away. You've made your point. Her heart pounded, but her voice stayed even. Tell your people the only way I'm walking away is through those courtroom doors, with the truth in my hands. He didn't flinch. Truth, he murmured, can be expensive. Good thing I'm already broke. The window slid shut. The car pulled away, leaving her standing alone, the city rushing past as if she wasn't even there. That evening, she met Brandon in his office. He looked worn, older, the scandal cutting deeper every day. I don't know who I can trust anymore, he confessed, rubbing his temples. Then trust the evidence, Alexis said firmly, laying the receipt and emails on his desk. His eyes moved over the papers, jaw tight. I gave Ryan everything. Let him sit in board meetings, handle files. I thought he was loyal. Loyalty built on silence isn't loyalty, Alexis replied. It's leverage. He looked up. You think we can win this? She nodded. If we stay 3 steps ahead. If we make it impossible for them to bury what we've found. Brandon leaned back, shaking his head slightly. You've done more in 1 week than a dozen high-priced lawyers did in a year. I'm not doing this for you, she reminded him. I'm doing it for people like me, the ones who never get a seat at the table unless they drag their own chair into the room. A faint smile touched his lips. Then let's make sure no one ever takes that chair away. That night in her apartment, Alexis thought of her father, the man who raised her on chess games played over milk crates and speeches by Malcolm X. He hadn't lived long enough to see her graduate, let alone fight like this. But she could almost hear his voice in the silence. Don't let them forget your name, baby girl. Make them remember who stood up when no one else did. She opened her laptop, the glow washing over her tired face. I'm not backing down, she whispered. The next morning, rain slicked the courthouse steps as Alexis climbed them, folder tight in her grip. Her hair curled damp at the edges, her coat soaked through, but her hold on the evidence never faltered. Inside, the air felt different, less mockery, more unease. They didn't dismiss her anymore. Now they watched her. Some with contempt, others with fear. Victoria Sloane swept in with two men in dark suits shadowing her. Not colleagues. Bodyguards. Insurance. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. We will begin with new evidence submitted by the defense, he announced. Miss Carter? Alexis rose. Your Honor, we present Exhibit C, a series of internal emails between Ryan Keller and Martin Lyle, along with financial records of a Swiss transfer to an account tied to Mr. Lyle. These documents show that Altair's lawsuit was not only unfounded, but deliberately manufactured to defraud and forcibly acquire Mr. Hayes's company. She handed the packet to the bailiff. Each step felt slow, deliberate, like time itself had thickened. The judge read in silence. Victoria sat still, but her clenched jaw betrayed her. Finally, the judge lifted his head. Miss Sloane, your response? Victoria stood, her voice sharper than usual. Your Honor, we question the authenticity of these documents. There is no proof they weren't fabricated after the fact. The alleged transfers could be forged. Alexis stepped forward, cutting her off. We anticipated that. Which is why we had them independently verified. The signatures were cross-matched against prior filings. The transfers confirmed by Swiss audit logs. Their sworn affidavit is included in the packet. The judge took a long breath. Very well. The court will review this thoroughly. Both parties remain available for continued examination. Recess was called. But no one moved. The weight in the air had shifted. Brandon leaned toward Alexis, whispering, You didn't just shake their foundation. You cracked it wide open. I'm not here to shake things, she replied softly. I'm here to make sure no one builds lies on broken ground again. Outside, reporters swarmed the steps. Flashes popped. Voices shouted. Miss Carter, is it true you were a maid before all this? Someone called out. She stopped, turned, and spoke into the nearest microphone. Yes. I was. And I still clean that same kitchen 3 nights a week. A few reporters laughed awkwardly, unsure. Alexis leaned closer, her voice firm. Let me be clear. I didn't need a corner office or $1,000 suit to see injustice. All I needed was my voice and the truth. Silence swept the crowd. That night at the diner, Reggie slid his phone across the table. You're trending. For what? She asked flatly. He tilted the screen toward her. A rain-soaked photo of her climbing the courthouse steps, folder clutched to her chest. The headline read, The Maid Who Might Take Down $1 Billion Empire. Alexis exhaled slowly. That's not what this is about. No, Reggie agreed. But that's what they'll understand. A woman who wasn't supposed to speak, speaking louder than billionaires. A black woman in an apron, tearing down their walls. She shook her head. I don't want fame. I want justice. Then stay ready, Reggie warned. Because when you speak truth to power, power speaks back. And it doesn't whisper. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He knows where you live. Her throat tightened. They're not even pretending anymore. Reggie's jaw set hard. You need protection. Quiet, no drama. Let me get someone near your building. I'll be fine, she said. But her voice lacked its usual steel. That night, she slept in fragments, binder at her side, her hand resting on it like a shield. Every creak, every groan of the old walls sent her eyes snapping open. By morning, worn but steady, Alexis walked into Brandon's office for a final prep before the hearing. You're making enemies in high places, he said quietly. I don't mind heights, she replied. I just want to know where the ladder ends. He slid a document across the desk. My private counsel drafted a motion to dismiss for tampering. With your evidence, it could work. Alexis scanned it, nodding. Good. But we don't just dismiss, we countersue. Fraud. Defamation. Emotional distress. Let them feel the system crush them for once. Brandon studied her, almost in awe. You've changed. No, she said softly. I've just stopped hiding. As she left, he watched her go. For the first time in weeks, Brandon Hayes didn't feel like the most powerful person in the room, and he didn't mind it. By the time court convened, the press benches were overflowing. Reporters whispered updates into mics. The city was watching, not just for the billions at stake, but for Alexis Carter, the woman in the apron who had become a symbol of resistance breaking into rooms she wasn't meant to enter. She walked into the chamber in a simple navy dress, binder in hand, her tired face calm but resolute. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't have to. She already owned the room. Brandon rose as she reached the table. They're calling it the case of the cleaning lady. CNN ran with it last night. Let them, Alexis said. That's what they understand. They don't know what it means to study case law in a laundry room with roaches crawling on the walls. They don't know what it means to fight when no one even knows you're in the ring. He nodded quietly. You're going to win this. We're going to win it, she corrected. But not by playing their game. We make our own rules now. The judge entered, and the courtroom settled. Today we reviewed the defense's motion to dismiss based on evidence of fraud, tampering, and unethical corporate behavior. The court has reviewed the documents overnight. Miss Sloane, the floor is yours. Victoria stood, her poise cracked by fatigue. Your Honor, the defense's evidence is circumstantial and improperly sourced. We request exclusion under Rule 403. Before the judge could respond, Alexis stepped forward. Your Honor, I have additional verification regarding the Swiss transfer. The receiving bank has confirmed that the account belongs to an entity with Mr. Martin Lyle as a primary beneficiary. Alexis said clearly, her voice carrying across the courtroom. They've provided notarized confirmation, which I've included in our latest exhibit. The judge motioned for the documents. Continue. Furthermore, Alexis stepped forward, binder firm in her hands. We have a new witness. An associate from Altair Holdings who has agreed to testify under federal protection. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the gallery. Victoria Sloane's voice cracked slightly. Who? Alexis stood still. Her name will remain withheld for security reasons, but she has first-hand knowledge of internal conversations regarding fabricated clauses, manipulated IP routing, and the deliberate effort to ruin Mr. Hayes's reputation. The judge leaned forward. If this witness confirms these claims, and her testimony is credible, this would justify full dismissal and possibly open a new criminal investigation. Victoria sank lower in her chair. Court recessed until the witness could be prepared. Outside, Alexis met the witness, a pale, nervous young woman barely 23, clutching a messenger bag against her chest like a shield. You're sure about this? Alexis asked softly. Elise Parker nodded, her voice trembling. I was there when Martin told us to alter the metadata. I heard him say it. The goal wasn't winning, it was destroying. They wanted to ruin Mr. Hayes so no one else would dare question their leverage again. Alexis placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You're doing what most people never would. I'm just tired of being quiet, Elise whispered. I couldn't sleep anymore. Then let's give them something they won't forget, Alexis replied. That evening, Alexis walked the familiar streets of Newark. The city felt heavier now, like the concrete itself was watching. She passed the corner bodega, where Mr. Lee, the owner with cracked teeth and a kind smile, waved. "You're on the news again," he said, pressing a bottle of water into her hand. "Give them hell, Alexis." She managed a faint smile. "That's the plan." Back at her apartment, she reached for the light switch, and froze. The desk lamp had been knocked over. Her notes were scattered. Someone had been inside. She stood motionless, listening. No sound. No movement. Backing out slowly, her heart racing, she called Reggie from the hallway. "They broke in. They didn't take anything. They just wanted me to know." Reggie swore under his breath. "You need to get out. I've got cousins in Hoboken. Quiet building, mostly retirees. No one will think to look there." She hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." That night, Alexis sat on a couch surrounded by porcelain cats and doilies. Fear should have consumed her, but she was beyond fear now. She was focused. Near midnight, she called Brandon. "I want to go public." "You already are," he said. "No," she replied firmly. "I mean a press conference. Full transparency. Every document. Make it impossible for them to bury this. You'll make yourself a target." "I already am." He exhaled. "Okay. I'll arrange it. But once we step into that spotlight, there's no turning back." Then we step together. The next morning, Alexis stood behind a podium outside the courthouse, a wall of microphones in front of her, flashbulbs firing like lightning. "I wasn't hired to fight this case," she began, her voice calm but unshakable. "I wasn't trained to stand in a courtroom. But I have stood for the truth, and I will keep standing. Because power built on lies deserves to fall." Behind her, Brandon Hayes gave a small nod, his face unreadable. And somewhere in the crowd, a voice whispered, "She's not just defending him. She's defending all of us." The following morning, Alexis awoke in the Hoboken apartment to a soft knock. She opened the door cautiously and found Reggie, holding 2 coffees and a bag of croissants. "Thought you could use fuel," he said with a weary grin. She accepted the cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Thanks. I barely slept. I kept waiting, for a call, a knock, something." Reggie sat down. "Sometimes the most dangerous moment isn't when they come at you. It's when they go quiet." She nodded. She understood. After the press conference, support had flooded in. Messages from janitors, single mothers, law students, people who saw their own struggles in hers. But Altair's silence was unsettling. No statements. No denials. Just quiet. Then Brandon called. "Lyle hasn't shown up to his office in 2 days. And this morning, Victoria Sloan filed a motion to withdraw. Claimed conflict of interest." "She's backing out?" Alexis asked, stunned. "Looks like it. And Elise told me she was contacted last night. Not a direct threat, just a message. They know she's cooperating. They're scrambling," Alexis muttered. "They know it's collapsing." Brandon's voice dropped. "Alexis, I've seen men with money do unspeakable things to protect secrets. Be careful." "I'm not going back underground," she replied. "Not now." By noon, the news broke. Financial leaks tied Martin Lyle to hidden accounts in Panama, Zurich, and Singapore. Altair's stock plummeted 19% in 2 days. The SEC had opened investigations. Sitting with Reggie, Alexis whispered, "This isn't about me anymore. It's about everyone they've crushed who never had the chance to fight back. You're becoming the face of something bigger," Reggie said quietly. "Then I need to act like it." That afternoon, she met Brandon in a rented law office. A security team hovered by the door. Inside, Marcia Delgado, an independent legal advisor, studied the files. "You don't just have a case for dismissal," Marcia said. "You have grounds for damages, emotional distress, corporate sabotage, even witness endangerment." Alexis glanced at Brandon. "Are you ready for that?" Brandon's eyes darkened. I've lost more than reputation. They tried to erase me, my name, my legacy. And they nearly succeeded. They would have, Alexis added, if someone hadn't bothered to read every line. They counted on silence. Marcia looked up. They'll try to settle once they see you won't back down. Then we don't settle, Alexis said firmly. We drag every piece into the light. Brandon leaned back slowly. This is war. No, Alexis corrected. War is what they did when they thought no one was watching. This is justice. That night, her phone buzzed again. A blocked number. Thought you were clever, huh? An older voice sneered. You think you've won something? Not yet, Alexis said steadily. You don't know who you're dealing with. I know exactly who. Men who hide behind power and fear. But I'm not afraid of either. The line went dead. She stared at her phone for a long time, then sat down at her laptop. She drafted a full timeline, linking every document, memo, and transfer. She sent copies to 3 lawyers, 2 journalists, and tucked another onto an encrypted drive. If anything happened to her, the truth wouldn't die. The next morning, Elise called in tears. They went after my father. He owns a dry cleaner in Flatbush. They broke the window. Didn't steal anything. Just left a note, stay quiet. Alexis's stomach twisted. Is he okay? He's shaken. I am too. But I'm not backing down. Hold on, Alexis said gently. We're almost there. By Friday, the judge ordered a full evidentiary hearing. Altire's stock continued to tumble. The board released a weak denial, but no one was buying it. On the courthouse steps, Brandon stood beside Alexis, not as a disgraced billionaire, but as an ally. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing, but it was Alexis who stepped forward. This isn't just a victory for me or for Mr. Hayes, she said firmly. This is a moment for everyone who has ever been silenced by a system built to protect the powerful. We've shown that truth, persistence, and courage can crack even the strongest walls. Applause rose from the crowd. Elise stood quietly at the back, tears streaking her face. Alexis caught her eye and gave a nod. They weren't fighting in the shadows anymore. They were pulling everything into the light. The morning of the hearing arrived with eerie calm. Alexis walked up the courthouse steps, binder in hand, the weight of a nation watching her every move. Her name was no longer just a headline. It was a symbol, whispered in classrooms, repeated in blogs, carried in hushed tones in cafes. Brandon met her outside the courtroom. His suit was sharp, but his eyes carried something softer. Respect. Gratitude. You ready? He asked quietly. Alexis gave a half smile. I was born ready. They just didn't know it. Inside, the gallery was packed. Press, lawyers, spectators, even Altire board members desperate to shield themselves. The judge's voice cut through the air. Today's hearing will determine whether the defense's evidence establishes fraud and misconduct sufficient to proceed to trial or escalate to criminal investigation. Alexis rose. Your Honor, I submit Exhibit D, an email from Mr. Martin Lyle, dated 2 months before the lawsuit, outlining a strategy to destabilize Mr. Hayes's holdings and force renegotiation of key assets. Authenticated by 3 forensic analysts, metadata tied directly to Altire's VPN. The judge's brow furrowed as he scanned it. The plaintiff's replacement counsel stood stiffly. Your Honor, we do not deny the email exists. But we argue it was taken out of context. Alexis didn't hesitate. Then let's put it in context. She projected the full chain on the screen. The replies were damning. Walker won't see it coming. Make sure Ryan handles the signature trail. Gasps swept the room. The judge turned to the plaintiff's lawyer. Do you have a response? The man cleared his throat. Not at this time. The judge shifted his gaze. Mr. Hayes, do you wish to make a statement? Brandon stood slowly. I built my company with people I trusted. Some of them betrayed that trust, Brandon Hayes said steadily. But what matters today isn't just clearing my name. It's recognizing what was done to silence voices like Miss Carter's. She wasn't supposed to be heard. And yet here she is, loud, clear, and true. He turned to Alexis. And I thank her, not as a businessman, but as a man who nearly forgot that truth matters more than pride. Alexis's throat tightened, but she stayed focused. Elise, she said gently, would you like to speak? Elise Parker stood, trembling slightly but with a fire in her eyes. I joined Altair because I believed in opportunity. I stayed silent because I was afraid. But Alexis gave me courage. And today, I want the court to know, Martin Lyle instructed several of us to alter timestamps and destroy digital records. I did it. I'm ashamed. But I will no longer be part of hiding the truth. The judge nodded solemnly. The next hour passed in a storm of documents, financial records, chain of custody reports, even video of Martin Lyle entering a Zurich banking office, obtained with the help of an investigative team Brandon had hired after Alexis's suggestion. Then the judge's voice cut through the air. Given the weight of the evidence, the credibility of the witnesses, and the plaintiff's failure to contest these findings, I am dismissing the case in full. Furthermore, I am referring these materials to the U.S. Attorney's Office for potential prosecution under federal fraud statutes. This court is adjourned. No cheers, no applause, just silence. Reverent. Like the moment after a storm finally breaks. On the courthouse steps, reporters surged forward. Alexis stood before them, not as a question mark, but as an answer. When asked for comment, she simply said, "Truth is slow, but it never stops walking." Brandon stood beside her, quiet for a long moment before adding, "This woman didn't just defend me. She defended every working person who's ever been stepped on and told to be grateful for it." That night, back in Hoboken, Alexis sat alone with her binder on her lap. The case was over, but the fight wasn't. There were more battles ahead, more systems to challenge. Her phone buzzed. A text from Elise, "You okay?" "I am now," Alexis wrote back. Then came another, "My dad wants to meet you. He says you remind him of someone he used to believe in." Alexis smiled. "I'd like that." She walked to the window, watching the city lights glow endless and soft. For the first time in months, she breathed, not as warning, but as peace. The system had tried to silence her, but Alexis had spoken, and the world had listened. The days after victory blurred into headlines and cautious celebrations. Calls came, offers poured in. Alexis turned most down, speaking only once, in an op-ed for The Atlantic, where she described her experience and warned about the quiet ways power hides behind legality. Victory wasn't healing. Justice, even when won, left scars. Brandon invited her to dinner at a small Battery Park restaurant. No ties, no cameras, just two people who had survived something enormous. "I keep expecting it to collapse," he admitted over chowder. "Like someone will tell me it was all a dream." "It wasn't," Alexis said softly. "Dreams don't leave bruises like these." He chuckled faintly. "How are you holding up?" "Tired. A little paranoid. But clearer than ever." "And you?" she asked. He leaned back. "I know now how close I came to being the villain in someone else's story. If you hadn't shown up, I would have signed everything away." She studied him. "You were never the villain. But you were blind. And the system counted on that." He nodded slowly. "I'll never stop paying attention again." They clinked glasses, not to victory, but to vigilance. The next morning, Alexis visited Elisa's father's dry cleaning shop. The broken window had been replaced, and taped to the glass was a small sign, "Thank you, Alexis." Inside, the man folded a pressed shirt with practiced hands. "You must be Alexis," he said warmly. "Elise told me you're tougher than steel and kinder than bread." She smiled. "That's high praise. Come sit." He motioned to a stool. "Let me tell you something. When Elise was little," he explained, "she used to sneak into the back with comic books and pretend she was training to be a hero. I'd laugh, because I thought the world doesn't give girls like her capes. But then you walked into that courtroom and made the world listen. So, thank you? Alexis swallowed hard. I didn't do it alone. No one ever does, he said softly. But someone's got to start it. They shared coffee. And for a while, it felt like family. Later that week, Alexis stood before a community forum in Harlem. No suit, just a sweater and jeans. Her voice, steady and warm, carried across the room. Justice doesn't start in marble halls. It starts in mail rooms, in kitchens, in janitors' closets. It starts with someone saying, no, this isn't right. Even if no one else is listening. Sometimes that means people in power lose their comfort so truth can breathe. The crowd rose, clapping not out of obligation but recognition. Afterward, a young black woman approached her, clutching a battered civil procedure for beginners. Miss Carter, I want to do what you did. Fight for people who don't even know they need help yet. Alexis thumbed through the wrinkled pages and handed the book back. Start by learning their names, their stories, their pain. Law is just a tool. The real work is listening. The girl nodded. Thank you. As Alexis walked back to her car, she passed a mural, her likeness, apron and all, arms folded, painted boldly across a Harlem wall. Above it, she didn't ask for permission. She laughed, breath-catching, and snapped a photo, not for social media, but for herself. Proof that something had shifted. That night, Alexis sat at her kitchen table. The binder, her constant companion, lay closed. But she didn't shelve it. Instead, she opened her laptop and began drafting something new, the People's Law Project. Not a firm. Not a title. A foundation. A place where workers, janitors, and whistleblowers could find guidance without fear of cost or retaliation. Because justice should never depend on your wallet or the shine of your shoes. For the first time in months, Alexis felt peace. Not because the wound had healed, but because she was building something lasting. 1 year later, the courtroom was different, smaller, quieter. No cameras. Just folding chairs filled with bus drivers, home health aides, baristas, janitors. Alexis stood at the front, behind a modest plaque, the People's Law Project, free legal access for every worker. She looked out at the crowd. Most of you know my story. If you don't, you've probably heard someone else tell it louder than I ever meant it to be told. A few chuckles rippled. I never planned to be a lawyer. I planned to work, survive, keep my head down. But something happened. I saw something wrong. And I spoke. And everything changed. But here's the truth no one tells you, justice isn't a one-time act. It's a daily choice. It doesn't end in a courtroom. It begins there. And it continues here, with people like us. At the back of the room, Brandon Hayes stood quietly, hands clasped, smiling faintly. His company was smaller now, but cleaner. He had asked Alexis to be an ethics consultant, but she refused a salary. Every dollar went into funding this very room. On the wall behind her hung a mural of hands reaching upward, not for power, but for justice. Around it were the names of those the project had already helped, whistleblowers, tenants, workers wrongfully fired. We've trained 25 volunteers, Alexis continued. Translated court forms into Spanish, Haitian Creole, Tagalog. Opened 3 satellite offices. And we're just getting started. Applause filled the space, steady, grounded, real. Later, outside in the autumn air, Elise joined her. Can you believe it's been a year? She asked, cheeks pink from the wind. Feels longer, Alexis said. And also like yesterday. I still get scared. Elise admitted. Like someone's watching. Like it could all vanish. The fear never goes away, Alexis said gently. But it gets smaller when you're not alone. They walked toward the subway, ordinary again, safe in the crowd. That night, back at her kitchen table, Alexis opened a new folder, Whistleblower Protection Expansion Bill. She wasn't finished. Not even close. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Alexis Carter. She answered. A pause. Then a hesitant woman's voice. Hi. My name is Cassandra. I clean offices in Midtown. Last week, I found something I wasn't supposed to see. They told me to forget it, but I can't. I don't know what to do. Alexis's voice softened. You did the right thing by calling. You're not alone. Silence. Then a sob. Thank you? Alexis looked out her window at the city she once believed would never listen. But now, it was calling her. She leaned back in her chair and whispered, Let's begin again. Because justice wasn't just a battle. It was a legacy. And hers had only just begun.